Tonight's story is about a woman the city learned to recognize, until the day she vanished so cleanly it felt like she'd rehearsed it. Her voice used to cut through the stadium crowds, the same corners, the same warnings, and her husband came home to a house that looked normal at first glance. Pat? The problem was no trace of leaving. Not a coat missing, not a rushed note, not a sign she'd come back for anything. Just a Bible left open. A phone that never rang. And the feeling she didn't disappear into Pittsburgh. She disappeared from it. He notices it first in the air. Not the silence. Patricia's house could be quiet even when she was home. It was the way the quiet sat on everything like a weight, as if the rooms had been holding their breath for hours and were finally tired of pretending. Bob Kopta stands in the doorway of their North Hills house in Ross Township, still wearing his work jacket, still half thinking he'll hear her in the kitchen. Cupboard doors, a kettle, the soft scuff of shoes. Instead, the living room looks staged. The curtains hang the same. The furniture is the same. The light through the window is the same cold, late-day gray Pittsburgh always seems to keep in reserve. And yet something is missing that isn't furniture. He calls her name once. Ordinary, automatic, the way you call into a house when you're not even worried yet. Pat? Nothing. He calls again, louder, annoyed at himself for feeling a faint pinch of unease. Still nothing. He walks room to room. He checks the bedroom, the bathroom, the basement door, the little places his mind inventories without permission. There's no sign of a struggle, no broken picture frame, no overturned chair, which should have been comforting. It isn't. It feels like the house is proving a point. You won't get a story. You'll get a blank. He stops near the kitchen table. There's no coat tossed over a chair, no leftover lunch plate with a crust of something, no half-finished note in her neat handwriting. The spaces where her habits usually leak into the day are clean, wiped, as if someone erased the evidence of her existing. He stands there and listens to the refrigerator hum. The phone sits on the counter like a trap, and in that moment, a moment he will replay for years until it loses all meaning and still keeps its shape, Bob realizes he doesn't know what he is supposed to do next, because the rules that apply to other people don't apply to Patricia anymore. With Patricia, there has always been this other set of rules, written in a language he never learned, the Sparrow's rules. For Pittsburgh, she was never Patricia first. She was a figure, an interruption, something you noticed even if you tried not to. If you were around downtown in the late 1980s or anywhere the city's crowds thickened, Gateway Center, Oakland, the sidewalks outside Three Rivers Stadium, you could walk through a sea of black and gold jerseys and still feel her presence, the way you feel a sharp wind that finds the gap in your coat. She didn't look like people expected a street preacher to look. There was none of the theatrical dirt, none of the layers of rags, none of the performative chaos. She was small, almost delicate. Her dresses were pressed. Her hair was set with care. Her nails looked like someone had taken time to file them and paint them and keep them from splitting. If you didn't know better, you might have mistaken her for a school secretary on her lunch break or a dance teacher stepping outside for air. And then she opened her mouth. Her voice didn't match her size. It cut through traffic and conversation like a siren you can't locate. The end is near. Repent. Fire is coming. Nuclear Armageddon. Sometimes the words changed. The intensity didn't. She moved with a quick, darting energy. One step forward, a sudden pivot, a hop back, head angled as if she was listening to something just out of earshot. People called her the Sparrow. because she seemed to perch on corners and railings and thresholds, always in motion, always ready to launch into the next warning. To strangers, she was a story you told later, an odd detail you carried home, like a burr stuck to your clothing. To Bob, she was his wife. That difference between the city's nickname and his private name for her was the thin seam his life began to split along. They'd been married a long time. They had the kind of history that feels ordinary until it's the only thing left. A first meeting near water, a courtship that grew into routines, a house in the North Hills, family holidays, the quiet agreement of two lives braided together. She was bright. She'd been a model, a ballroom dance instructor, a woman who could move across a floor with confidence because she trusted the floor to stay where it was. Then, in the early 1980s, something changed in her that Bob couldn't name, couldn't argue with, couldn't negotiate down. She took a job as an elevator operator at the Art Institute of Pittsburgh. And at some point, whether it was one day or a slow creep of days that only became obvious later, she began to talk about messages, signs, a sense that something had been revealed to her, and that her old life was suddenly a costume she was supposed to remove. Gloria Smith, Patricia's sister, would later describe the pivot with a simple, stunned phrase. Patricia said she saw an angel. Bob never knew what to do with that sentence. Angels didn't fit into the kitchen. They didn't fit into mortgage payments and grocery lists and the soft, unspoken plans people make when they assume the future is a straight road. But Patricia talked as if the future had already curved away from everyone, and only she had been allowed to see the bend. She quit jobs. She drifted from stability like it was something that burned her skin. She began walking the streets for hours, sometimes all day, sometimes into the night. She came home exhausted, feet swollen, body worn down by concrete and cold. Bob begged her to stop, to see a doctor, to rest, to come back to the woman he remembered. Patricia would look at him with that same bright, fixed intensity that strangers saw on corners, and she would say, in one form or another, "You don't understand. There's work to do." If he tried to argue, her face didn't change the way people's faces change when they're persuaded. It changed the way a door changes when you push on it and realize it's locked from the other side. The streets can be cruel to anyone who doesn't move with the crowd. Pittsburgh wasn't gentle with the Sparrow. People laughed, people ignored her, people leaned in close just to mock her and see if she would flinch. Some got angry, as if her warnings were an accusation. She became a kind of public object, part sermon, part spectacle, part urban myth in real time. At least once, Bob learned, she was arrested after endangering herself in traffic, running into the road, trying to stop motorists, insisting disaster was imminent. There was also a period when she was hospitalized, involuntarily, for her behavior, doctors calling it delusions, a break from reality, something that could be medicated into silence. For Bob, that month, however long it lasted, was a bruise on the marriage. He told himself the doctors were trying to help. He told himself Patricia would be relieved to be safe, warm, away from strangers who might harm her. Patricia didn't experience it that way. When she came home, she was quieter. Not calmer, quieter, guarded. Her words became fewer and heavier. If the street preaching had been her attempt to reach the world, the hospitalization seemed to teach her a different lesson. Reaching the world gives the world something to grab. She told Gloria something like a vow. "They will never do that to me again." Bob heard versions of it too. Sometimes in the middle of the night when he woke to find her sitting upright in bed, eyes open, as if she'd been listening to a distant voice in the house. He didn't ask what she was hearing. When you love someone and you don't understand them anymore, you learn a kind of carefulness. You learn which questions start arguments, which questions start fear, and which questions simply reveal how little control you have. Bob learned to live with dread like a second household pet, always underfoot, always present, never fully acknowledged. And then came the day he walked into that unnaturally tidy, silent house. At first, he didn't call the police. That detail would haunt him later, because people have opinions about the timing of panic. They like their fear immediate and theatrical. They like a missing person case to begin with a slam of certainty, a dramatic pivot. Real fear is slower. With Patricia, absence could be routine. She could be gone for hours, sometimes overnight, walking the city, moving from crowd to crowd, convinced she was outrunning something invisible. She could be stubborn enough to vanish on purpose just to prove a point. So Bob waited. He kept doing small tasks because tasks are the only thing you can do when you don't know what else to do. He checked the answering machine. He stood by the phone. He walked to the porch and watched the street. He told himself she'd come in with a gust of cold air, complaining about nothing, exhausted, eyes bright with that mission again. Evening came. Night came. The phone didn't ring. There was no call from a hospital. No call from a police station. No friend knocking on the door with an apologetic look. No neighbor saying, "We saw her." There was only the house holding its breath. By the time 24 hours turned to 48, the dread wasn't a pet anymore. It was the air itself. It filled every room. It sat in his throat. He called the police. Ross Township officers came, asked questions, looked around. They took down the details. Patricia Kopta, missing, last seen in 1992. People always say later that a missing person case becomes a story. That's true in one sense. But while you're inside it, it's not a story. It's an inventory of absences. Bob began driving downtown, scanning crowds, looking for bird-like quickness, the pressed fabric of a dress, that unmistakable posture. Chin lifted, eyes fixed on a point nobody else could see. He went to Steelers games because if she was anywhere, surely she would be where the crowds were largest, where the noise could not drown her out. And every time he didn't see her, the absence grew heavier. The city, meanwhile, responded the way cities respond, with rumor. Someone claimed she was spotted in New York. Someone said Chicago. Someone insisted California. With every false lead, Bob learned a fresh version of hope. Sharp, bright, short-lived, and a fresh version of grief when it collapsed. Police did what they could with what they had, but they didn't have much. Disappearances are hungry that way. They swallow facts. They also swallow trust. Because very quickly, as predictably as weather, suspicion drifted toward Bob. It's the first reflex in cases like this. Look at the spouse. Look at the person closest. Look for motive. Look for anger. And there had been strain. Everyone knew it. Patricia's transformation wasn't private. The Sparrow was a public figure. People whispered that Bob must have been embarrassed, must have been frustrated, must have snapped. Bob could feel the invisible shift when he went to the grocery store or walked down the street. Neighbors watching him as if they were waiting for his face to reveal guilt. It's a special kind of isolation when the person you're missing is the person who made your life make sense, and the world reacts by treating you like a suspect for wanting answers. Bob kept searching anyway. He hired a private investigator at one point because he couldn't stand the idea of simply waiting. He placed ads. He followed every lead. He kept Patricia's clothes in the closet like a superstition. If he preserved the space for her, maybe the universe would have to put her back into it. Years passed. The Sparrow became an urban legend, a Pittsburgh ghost that people swore they saw in crowds, always slipping away before anyone could get close enough to prove it. Bob aged inside the waiting. Then, around 1999, after enough time had passed that the law allowed it, he made a decision that felt like betrayal, even though it was survival. He petitioned to have Patricia declared legally dead. The court process was paperwork and procedure, but emotionally it was a funeral without a body, a ritual performed for a person who might still be breathing somewhere under a different sky. There was a memorial. An empty space was honored like a presence. Bob went home afterward to a house that still felt like it was holding its breath. While Pittsburgh kept telling itself the Sparrow's story in the past tense, another story was moving quietly in a different language. Puerto Rico is not Pittsburgh. The air is different. The light behaves differently. The sun is less forgiving. Towns in the island's northern interior carry hills in their bones. Streets climb, alleys narrow, voices echo off stucco and concrete. In the late 1990s, police and social workers in that region encountered an English-speaking woman wandering in and out of northern towns. Naranjito, Corozal, Toa Alta. Thin, weathered, clearly in need of help. She did not give them her name. They tried. They asked gently. They asked firmly. They offered food. They offered a safe bed. They offered the comfort of paperwork. If you give us your name, we can contact your family. We can find where you belong. We can put you back into the world. The woman looked around as if every question had teeth. She wouldn't answer. In 1999, authorities brought her to an adult care home, classified as a person in need. To the staff, she was a mystery that never quite resolved. A Jane Doe. A quiet presence in the hallways. Polite, gentle, not violent, not difficult. Just sealed. People who work around the vulnerable learn to read small signals. A flinch at a certain word. The way someone's shoulders rise when a door closes. The way a person watches the window as if they expect a shape to appear there. This woman watched the world like it might reach through the glass. She guarded her history the way others guard their children. Sometimes, rarely, cracks appeared. A nurse might catch a phrase spoken too quickly, as if her mouth betrayed her before she could stop it. Something about cold weather. Something about football. Something about a city that sounded like Pittsburgh if you tilted your head. Once she mentioned arriving in Puerto Rico on a cruise ship from Europe, a detail so strange that staff filed it away as confusion, an invented narrative, the kind of story that drifts out of people when they're trying to fill a hole they can't look into. Years went by. The woman aged. Time in a care home is repetitive in a way that can feel merciful until you realize repetition is also what erodes you. Meals, medications, visits that don't happen, holidays that become just another day, faces that come and go, names that don't matter if you refuse to use your own. Eventually, dementia began its slow, relentless work. It peeled back the careful layers the woman had built around herself. It loosened the knots she'd tied in her mind to keep the past from spilling out. It made her say things she had survived by not saying. A name, whispered like a prayer. Bob. Another name, softer, almost affectionate. Gloria. And sometimes a word that made a particular social worker stop and look again, because it didn't sound like nonsense. It sounded like a title. Sparrow. In 2022, that social worker did what no one had done with enough seriousness in a long time. She listened like the woman was trying to tell the truth and simply didn't know how anymore. She began writing down the fragments the way you write down clues in a case you don't yet know you're building. Pittsburgh, husband named Bob, sister named Gloria, street preaching, a nickname, Sparrow. The social worker searched. Not casually, not like a bored person Googling a curiosity, but with the focused persistence of someone who has spent years watching people disappear in plain sight. A cold case surfaced in the results. Ross Township, Pennsylvania. A missing woman from 1992, Patricia Kopta, known as the Sparrow. The social worker contacted authorities. Interpol became involved in connecting the dots across jurisdictions. In Ross Township, Deputy Police Chief Brian Colehep received the call, and for a moment the case stopped being dead history and became something alive and dangerous again. A possibility that could reopen old wounds and rewrite old grief. Because here was the problem. If the Sparrow was alive, then every conclusion built over 3 decades was wrong. Every funeral without a body, every suspicion, every surrendered hope. They needed proof. And proof after 30 years is a slow thing. Police reached out to Gloria Smith, asked for DNA. They pulled Patricia's old records. They coordinated across distance and bureaucracy. The testing process took months, long enough that the waiting itself began to feel familiar. The same dragging, punishing stretch of time Bob had endured in 1992. Only now the waiting belonged to everyone. Bob, by then an old man, lived in the aftermath of his own decision to declare her dead. He had survived by turning grief into something manageable, something that didn't consume every hour of the day. He had told himself his life was a closed room. Then the phone rang. A detective's voice, a careful tone. A pause before the sentence as if the words had weight and might crack the line if delivered too fast. Bob listened, and the room, once again, seemed to hold its breath. On paper, the answer is simple. In March 2023, the results came back. The identity of the Jane Doe in Puerto Rico matched Patricia Kopta. But inside Bob, nothing about it was simple. Relief hit first, pure, involuntary. The kind of relief that makes you weak because your body has been braced for an ending, and suddenly the ending changes shape. He cried, not like a man performing emotion, but like someone whose nervous system finally stopped pretending it could carry this alone. Then came the second wave, heartbreak. Because the truth was not a reunion story. Not really. It was not the version of Found Alive that people want to imagine, where a missing person returns, explains, heals, and the years collapse neatly into a single embrace. Patricia was elderly now. Her mind had been worn down by time and illness. She had lived an entire life in the shadow of a fear nobody else could see. She was safe, yes, but she was not the Patricia Bob had lost, not the woman who had danced, not even the Sparrow as Pittsburgh remembered her. She was a person who had survived by becoming invisible. Bob was told she did not want to return to Pennsylvania. Puerto Rico had become her home, the only place her story had been allowed to continue without the weight of everyone else's expectations. Gloria wanted to go. Whether Patricia recognized her or not, Gloria wanted to hold her sister's hand and say what she'd been unable to say for 30 years. I didn't stop loving you just because you vanished. Bob, on the other hand, understood a different pain. The pain of reopening grief you have already learned to live with. He had spent decades imagining outcomes. Death, murder, an accident near water, a life on the streets, a mind lost. an ending that could be mourned. This ending was stranger, harder. A living person who was also, in many ways, unreachable. In the public retelling, there were details that sounded like poetic symmetry. The sparrow, a bird, had flown over water, not the rivers of Pittsburgh, but the ocean itself. And there were questions that refused to settle. How did Patricia get there? The cruise ship story, the one staff had dismissed for years, suddenly didn't feel like fantasy anymore. It felt like the kind of thing Patricia could have done if she believed she was being hunted. Disappear in plain sight by becoming a normal traveler, pressed dress, careful hair, a woman who looked like she belonged in a terminal, not on a missing poster. Some reports suggested she had wanted warmth, wanted a place where snow couldn't reach her, wanted distance between herself and the institutions she believed were trying to lock her away. The motive, depending on who tells it, is either heartbreakingly human or terrifyingly unknown. A woman fleeing an invisible enemy, or a woman fleeing the people trying to help her, or both. And that is the residue that remains after the tangible resolution. Patricia Kopta was found. The Sparrow was alive. The case was no longer a blank. But the question that started it, the question that ruined a marriage, rewired a family, and turned a city's familiar street preacher into a legend, still hangs in the air like something half-spoken. What, exactly, did Patricia see? An angel in an elevator, a message in the noise of the city, a fear that grew teeth. Or simply the moment her mind tilted, and the world became a place where safety could only be achieved by vanishing. Bob will never fully know, not in a way that lets him put it down and walk away. And in Pittsburgh, even now on cold afternoons when commuters keep their heads down against the wind, it's still possible to imagine her on a corner somewhere, pressed dress, bright eyes, voice too big for her body, warning strangers about an ending that, in her mind, was always just one day away. This was Midnight Horror Society, dark curiosity for sleep. Until your next midnight session, sleep well.